After passing the APC in 2015, I've spent the last 10 years coaching APC candidates, and during today's video we're going to look at some of the most difficult questions you may come across during your RICS final assessment interview. When addressing these, we'll go into as much detail as we can to really explain my thought process and how you can go about addressing some of these questions, and I really hope that this will improve your knowledge of some of the most difficult areas of the APC. This will include some of the ethical standards, which is regarded as the pass or fail section of the interview, as any failure to answer an ethics question correctly will result in a referral of the APC candidate. And the first question we'll take a look at is, in a scenario where you were competitively tendering for a project, you've submitted your bid, the client approaches you and advises that if you are able to offer them a £4,000 discount, they will award you with the project. How would you respond in this scenario? And to address this, I'll try to go into as much detail as I can here to really help build your knowledge of the RICS ethical standards. My first thought in this kind of scenario would be to ensure that I'm operating in line with the RICS rules of conduct. The first question I would ask myself is, am I acting with integrity and ethically? This is really making sure that I don't have an unfair advantage over others, and I'm not looking to mislead others. And in this scenario, we really have to consider whether we're gaining an unfair advantage over some of the other tendering parties. Assuming that the client hasn't approached them and offered them the same opportunity to offer a discount, then this really is gaining an unfair advantage over competing surveying practices, and I would be very uncomfortable about entertaining this kind of offer. I wouldn't be able to proceed with the client's offer there of offering the £4,000 discount, and I would need to respectfully decline this. And taking this a step further, when looking at rule number 2 of the RICS rules of conduct, we also need to make sure that we are acting competently and maintaining our competence when acting for clients. And assuming that we are going to look to offer the £4,000 discount, I think this would raise serious concerns around whether we can maintain our level of competence here. And as a business, we would need to try and find the £4,000 saving internally from somewhere. This may result in us having less resources to resource the project. We may have to even look at things like putting a more junior member of staff on the project, or a member of staff with less experience than what is needed. I'd like to think that the initial bid that we'd first submitted was good value for money and fair value to the client, and being able to offer them a significant discount at this stage again would make me feel really uncomfortable about being able to resource the project adequately, and I would have serious reservations about us being able to maintain our competence if offering the discount. And again, because of this, we would need to decline the client's offer of incorporating the £4,000 discount. That's not to say that we could work with them to reduce the bid, but we would really need to work with the client to potentially look at their objectives and what they're looking to achieve from the project. And with some scope omissions, it's not to say that the discount could be incorporated, but we would really have to liaise further with the client to understand more about their objectives, and this would have to be done fairly and transparently in a second round of tendering in conjunction with the other competing surveying firms also having an opportunity to submit a revised bid. And taking this a step further again and looking at rule number 3 of the RICS rules of conduct, we also need to make sure that we are offering a good quality and diligent service. So this really means, are we able to meet all of the client's objectives, and are we able to deliver on time? And again, in offering the £4,000 discount, this is a significant amount of money. As a surveying practice, we would need to find this saving internally from somewhere, and again, because of this, I would have serious reservations about being able to still fulfill all of the client's objectives and deliver on time, because we may have to reduce the internal resources for the project, and in doing this, this may cause us to not be able to deliver on time and not deliver the same high standard of service. Again, this is not to say we could work with the client to look at various different omissions of their scope, to understand more about their requirements and whether we've got a good handle on the objectives that they need, and also the timescales that we're working to. So again, it's not to say that we couldn't incorporate the saving. This really would have to be done by liaising with the client to look at their objectives, and again, it would have to be done in a second round under competition, in a second round of tenders, also giving competing surveying practices the opportunity to submit their revised bid as well. When reviewing rule number 4 of the RICS rule of conduct, this is based around treating others with respect, and assuming that the client's initial offer to reduce our bid by £4,000 isn't being done under competition and in a transparent and honest manner, we really have to ask ourselves that if we were to accept the client's proposal here, is this really treating other surveying practices with the respect that they deserve? We have to consider that as a surveying firm, it does cost a lot of money to compile fee bids and put fee proposals together. Really, this rule of conduct is all about treating others how you would like to be treated. If we had got wind that a competing surveying firm had been able to reduce their fee bid and this wasn't being done fairly and under competition, I dare say we would feel very disappointed by this. So again, assuming that the client's proposal of offering the discount isn't being done transparently and fairly and under competition, again, we would have to decline their offer here. And when considering the final rule of conduct, rule number 5, this is all about taking responsibility for our actions and maintaining public confidence in the profession. So really, when operating in line with rule number 5, we have to ask ourselves the question that if our actions and our decisions were made public, if they came into the spotlight in a news conference or a press article, could we stand over our decisions and our actions here? And I do think that if it came to light that we had been able to gain an advantage over our competitors and offer the £4,000 discount, and that this wasn't being done fairly and under competition, I really don't think that we would be proud of our actions here. I don't think we would be able to stand over this decision. If this came to light as well, this could bring our surveying practice and ourselves into disrepute and also reflect poorly on the RICS. So again, I think in offering the £4,000 discount in a scenario where this has not been done fairly and transparently, we would have to have serious reservations about doing this, and again, we would have to respectfully decline the client's proposal here. So I really hope that that provides a lot of detail and improves your understanding of the RICS rules of conduct and how to remain compliant so we operate in line with these. And I think by adopting this thought process, this will really support you in addressing even some of the most complex and difficult ethical questions during your final assessment interview. And for anybody feeling really overwhelmed or daunted by the APC, I am offering my APC Mentorship Programme in the link below. And the whole idea behind this is just try to make the APC as stress-free as possible, just breaking everything down into manageable steps that you can follow along with each month. I'll give you the best advice that I can in there that's helped hundreds of candidates gain chartered status over the last 10 years. So every member receives a free copy of the Q&A study guide. This includes over 1,000 questions to help you prepare for your APC, in addition to successful examples of case studies and summary of experience that you can use in order to assist you with populating your own documentation. And the next question we'll take a look at is, under the UK Bribery Act, under what circumstances is a facilitation payment permitted? And to address this question, we have to consider that the UK Bribery Act is a major piece of anti-bribery legislation that all surveyors need to be aware of. This piece of legislation has extraterritorial reach, meaning that it applies to surveyors in the UK, but it also applies to surveyors operating internationally and their third-party representatives. So if you're a business that has close connections to the UK, or if you operate part of your business in the UK, then this piece of legislation also applies to those surveyors and those firms as well. So even though this is a UK-driven piece of anti-bribery legislation, this really does have a global reach and is just so important for all surveyors to be aware of. And under the UK Bribery Act, any offer or receiving of a facilitation payment is strictly prohibited. The only circumstances where a facilitation payment is permitted under this piece of legislation if there was real and present danger to yourself or your colleagues or companions. So if you are under duress or immediate danger, the legislation does allow for facilitation payments to be made. So in this scenario, we would need to make the facilitation payment, but then report this to our ethical compliance contacts as soon as possible. But this is the only circumstance under the UK Bribery Act where a facilitation payment is permitted. There is also a free diary template in the link below, which will allow you to track and record your day-to-day surveying experience for your APC diary. This is provided in Excel format, and it does also include a progress dashboard. And this dashboard will allow you to highlight any shortfalls in your experience. You can then work to address these shortfalls to ensure that you have an even spread of experience across your competencies, which is key to be successful when working towards your APC. So please do check that out if that's of interest. This is provided completely free of charge, and it's helped hundreds of candidates successfully gain chartered status over the last 10 years. And taking this a step further, the next question we'll take a look at is what are the offences of the UK Bribery Act? And to address this, we would need to advise that the 4 offences under the Bribery Act are the making of a bribe, the offering of a bribe, the bribery of a foreign public official, and any failure of a commercial entity or organisation to prevent bribery on its behalf. And we have to remember that this legislation applies to all UK companies and entities, and this also includes their subcontractors and their representatives, for example, any subconsultants or external advisors. And the next question we'll take a look at is, can you please explain your understanding of the term conflict of interest? And this again is a major area of importance for all APC candidates to be aware of. To address this, we would need to say that a conflict of interest is where somebody in a position of trust or responsibility has a competing conflict of interest. So this could be an existing relationship with somebody or an existing business interest, and this makes it incredibly difficult for them to fulfill their duties impartially. A key example of this is at the start of your final assessment interview, the chairperson will undertake a conflict of interest check to ensure that you do not have an existing relationship with any of the interview panel. If a friend or family member was on the interview panel, it would make them incredibly difficult for them to undertake the assessment impartially because of the existing relationship that they have with you. So this is a good example of a conflict of interest, and it's so important for all APC candidates to be aware of. In the event that you do discover a conflict of interest when undertaking your business dealings, we really do need to report and act on this straight away, and we also need to make the client aware of any potential conflict of interest, and this needs to be done as soon as possible when this becomes apparent. And the next question we'll take a look at here is, if you discovered and reported a conflict of interest to your client, but they remained very insistent that you continued to operate for them, despite the conflict of interest, they remained very insistent that they wanted to continue with your appointment, how would you respond in this scenario? One of the things that we would need to do here initially is to really try and support the client and make sure that they have an understanding of the conflict of interest. So we would discuss this with them and highlight any potential risks. If they remained very persistent and still wanted to use our services, we would need to seek from them a signed letter of instruction to continue, and this would need to be in place before undertaking any further services for them. And this is just to record that we have made them aware of the conflicts of interest and all of the risks involved, and it's also there to serve as a record that they would still like to continue with our appointment despite the conflict of interest. And after receiving this letter, it's also very advisable to have regular meetings with them to discuss the conflicts of interest and make them aware of any ongoing risks to the project, and seek ongoing reassurance from them that they are comfortable with the conflict of interest being in place. And the next question we'll take a look at on this area is, if you were in a scenario where you were working for a client and you had two sister departments working for that same client, how could that conflict of interest be managed? So to explain more about this question, this could be a scenario where we're providing both project management services to the client and a clerk of work service to that same client, but this is operating from a separate department from within the business. We have to think that the department offering the project management services, and they are under pressure to deliver the project on time to the programme that has been agreed, whereas the sister department, the clerks of work service, is tasked with making sure that the works are being delivered in line with any specifications that they're set out. They may even have to halt progress and open up some elements of the work to carry out inspections and therefore delay progress. So we can really see how these two sister departments have competing angles and competing deliverables that they are tasked with, which does create a real issue and a real conflict of interest for the client. But assuming that we have highlighted this conflict of interest to them, we have a instruction to continue in place. One of the things that we could put in place to ensure that this situation is managed properly, we could ensure separate locations of both departments to ensure that there is no crossover of information and that there is no contact between the parties. We could also make sure that the team members in both departments sign a non-disclosure agreement, again to prevent any communication or information being leaked between those two departments. And another process we would need to put in place would be to have separate communication lines going back into the same client. So any communication must be done individually and as a separate entity going back into the same client, again to prevent any crossover of information. We would also need to make sure that we have secure document storage, whether this is hard copy storage or cloud-based document storage, but this would need to be accessible again individually to both departments, again to prevent any crossover or leaking of information between those two departments. And the next question we'll take a look at is another scenario-based question on the RICS ethical standards. And this scenario is that if you received an invite to attend the theatre with the project team that you were working with, but due to illness at the last minute it was announced that the project team had to drop out, how would you respond in this scenario? And to address this, we would have to advise that in the first instance we would have declared this hospitality on our hospitality register, and assuming that this was approved by the business and we were authorised to attend, due to the project team dropping out at the last minute, even though this is unfortunate due to health reasons, in this scenario we would need to decline the hospitality that's been offered. Since the project team are no longer going to be present at the event, then this no longer serves as a genuine business event or a networking event. And because of this, we would need to make the difficult decision to also drop out from the event. This would need to be done at the project team's expense. And because of this, we would also need to decline attending the event because it no longer serves a genuine business purpose. And the next question we'll take a look at is again another scenario-based question on the RICS ethical standards. In a scenario where a contractor invites you to a Michelin star restaurant and they advise that they are wanting to discuss their latest tender with you, how would you respond in this scenario? And to address this, we would really need to advise that going to a restaurant with a bidder during the middle of a tender process is highly inappropriate. This is a very serious issue here, which could even be perceived as a bribe, as you are gaining something of value here that could impact on your decision making and your business dealings. This could even reduce our ability to manage a tender process impartially, and therefore we really would need to decline this opportunity. Under the UK Bribery Act, there is also a very serious argument here to say that this could be perceived as a bribe potentially, as there is something of value that is being exchanged that could impact on our ability to act impartially and act fairly. If this was the first time that this kind of offer had happened, it would be okay to just decline this to the bidder and explain that doing this in the middle of a tender process is highly inappropriate. However, if the bidder is persistent and offers this kind of hospitality again, this really does raise a red flag, and we would need to report this to our ethical compliance contact or senior manager. And the next question we'll take a look at is a client care based question where in a scenario where you have been working on the client's project, where you're now getting towards the end of the project and all of the fees have been exhausted. This exercise and this project has actually been a loss-making exercise for your company internally. How would you respond in this scenario? And to address this, we have to consider that this is a client care-based question. Some of the key principles of the RICS are that it's all about providing high levels of customer service and client care. And in this scenario, assuming that there haven't been any scope changes or changes to the client's requirements or any project overruns, we really would need to continue to work for the client and continue to deliver for them, offering the same levels of customer service and high levels of client care. So the answer in addressing this question is that nothing really does change for the client. We would continue to operate for them as per the fee bid that had been agreed and as per the scope of services that had been agreed. That's not to say that if there is a change in scope and additional works that have been undertaken, we would be able to discuss this with the client with a view to gaining an uplift to the original fee. But assuming that this is not the case and there haven't been any scope changes, really when addressing this kind of question, the advice here is that nothing changes. We continue to operate for the client as we have done, providing the same level of customer service and delivering the same high standards of client care. So the next question to address is, can you please tell me how you've demonstrated 2 of the 5 rules of conduct within your case study project? And speaking from experience, this was a question that I was asked in my own final assessment interview. And to address this, obviously this is personal to each and every candidate, and they will have to pick out the rules of conduct that they feel that they have been able to demonstrate. I address this question by first of all advising that I demonstrated rule number 3, which is to provide a good quality and diligent service. I was able to review a tender submission, and despite this being over budget for the client, I was able to implement a round of value engineering on the tender submission in order to try and bring this back in line with their own budget and achieve a good outcome for the client. I really felt at the time as though I'd done a good job for the client here and delivered a high standard of service whilst understanding their client objectives. And the other rule of conduct I made reference to at the time was rule number 1, which is acting with honesty and integrity. Again, I felt as though I was able to demonstrate this at the time because I was undertaking a tender exercise with competing contractors. I had to make sure that this was done in a fair and honest manner, making sure that any of the latest information or tender queries were circulated around all tender parties to make this a fair competition, acting with honesty and integrity in doing this. So these were the 2 rules of conduct I was able to make reference to at the time, but this is just another potential question to be aware of. It requires candidates to have a good working knowledge of the RICS rules of conduct, which we must have in place prior to attending our final assessment interview. So try to make sure that you have a really good understanding of these and also understand how you have been able to demonstrate this through your experience prior to your final assessment interview. So the next question we'll take a look at is, when attending a business conference, it's announced that you are selected as the random winner of a high value item such as an iPad or a MacBook computer. And after randomly being selected, how would you respond in this scenario? So again, this is quite a difficult question to address for a lot of APC candidates. It may appear as though this is by chance in a innocent and honest manner, but we must remember that in the event that we did accept this random prize, it could potentially be perceived as a bribe, particularly with the item being of high value. We really need to again go back to the RICS ethics decision tree and rules of conduct. We need to ask ourselves whether accepting a high value item like this is promoting public confidence in the profession, which I really don't think it is. Also making sure that we are acting with honesty and integrity within our dealings and acting lawfully. We also need to consider whether accepting this high value item could be perceived as a bribe, which again is a very serious issue, going back to the UK Bribery Act, which is a hugely powerful piece of legislation. So again, accepting this item of high value would make me personally extremely uncomfortable. It could be perceived as a bribe, and in this scenario we would really need to advise that we would respectfully decline the prize. We would also need to report this incident in a very timely manner to our ethical compliance contact, and having the RICS rules of conduct in the forefront of our mind and also thinking through the ethics decision tree, we can really determine that the right thing to do here is to decline the prize respectfully, report this to our ethical compliance contact, and all the time we are covering ourselves, making sure that we are being honest and fair in our dealings, and that there's no perception there that we are potentially accepting a bribe, which is a very serious issue. And a follow-on question we may receive on this is, can you please explain what insurances you would need to have in place if setting up as an RICS regulated firm? And to address this, first of all, we could make reference to professional indemnity insurance cover, as we've just mentioned. We could also make reference to public liability cover, employer's liability cover, and the insurance of both the buildings and contents of any business premises that we were operating within. And staying with the theme of professional indemnity insurance cover, we may receive further questions on this, which aim to test our understanding of the minimum RICS requirements for professional indemnity insurance, which is a major area of importance for all APC candidates to be aware of. And a further question we may receive on this area is, can you please explain your understanding of the minimum requirements for professional indemnity insurance cover that is set by the RICS? And the RICS minimum policy wording sets out that the insurance cover must be in place on an each and every claim basis or in the aggregate, plus an unlimited round-the-clock reinstatement basis. And the RICS requirements also state that the minimum level of indemnity is to be based on the firm's turnover in the previous year, although this can be estimated for a new firm. And this states that if the firm's turnover in the preceding year is £100,000 or less, the minimum level of indemnity should be £250,000. If the firm's turnover is between £101,000 to £200,000, then the minimum level of indemnity cover required is £500,000. Whereas if the firm's turnover is in excess of £201,000 in the preceding year, then the minimum level of indemnity cover required is £1 million. And the RICS policy wording also determines the maximum levels of uninsured excess that RICS regulated firms are allowed to have. And again, this is based on the levels of indemnity cover. For example, if the level of indemnity is up to and including £500,000, is a greater of 2.5% of the sum insured or £10,000. If the minimum levels of indemnity are in excess of £500,000, then the maximum levels of uninsured excess are 2.5% of the insured sum. Further requirements for professional indemnity insurance are that the policy must be made on a fully retroactive basis. The policy must be underwritten by a RICS listed insurer, and this must also cover past and present employees. But a further question we may receive on this is, can you please explain your understanding of the term retroactive? The meaning of the term retroactive means that the policy that is in place at the time of a claim being made is the policy that is called upon. And we'll now take a look at some questions focused around complaints handling, which again is a major area of importance for all APC candidates. And the first question we'll take a look at on this area is, can you please explain which items a complaints handling procedure must include? And to address this, we can advise that the RICS provide a model form for complaints handling, and this process must include a robust redress mechanism. Details of the policy should be issued to the client within the terms of business, and the policy must be clear, quick, transparent, impartial, and also free of charge within the first stage. The name and contact details of the investigating person must also be clearly stated. The complaint must be investigated within 28 days after being received, and all complaints, progress and outcomes must be recorded. We must also note the need to notify our professional indemnity insurance provider immediately when receiving a complaint, and the overall process must contain 2 stages as a minimum. Within the first stage, this is where the complaint needs to be considered by a senior member of staff or a nominated complaints handler. And stage 2 comes into place where the issue cannot be resolved within stage 1, and during stage 2 the complaint will be referred to an independent third-party redress mechanism, and the complainant may be expected to contribute towards the costs incurred at this stage. A follow-on question we may receive on this is, can you please explain your understanding of the independent redress mechanism? And to address this, we can advise that this is a consumer scheme designed to handle small issues that would be disproportionately expensive to take to court, and if the scheme judges in favour of the claimant, then this decision is binding. If the independent redress mechanism judges in favour of the firm, the complainant can still escalate this matter and take this matter to court. RICS regulated firms must specify which independent redress mechanism they wish to use. This could be an ombudsman, arbitration, or sometimes adjudication. If the complaint relates to a large sum of money, or if the complainant wishes so, they can still take this matter to court. Another follow-on question we may receive on this area: what would your actions need to be in the event that you were to receive a letter of complaint from a client in writing? And to address this, we would need to advise that first of all we would acknowledge the complaint with the client. We would forward this on to our designated complaints handler or senior member of staff. We would need to provide additional information with this as required. We would seek to keep the client updated with the progress of their complaint, and as an immediate action we would also need to notify our professional indemnity insurers. And the next question we'll take a look at is, can you please explain your understanding of the Merit versus BAB case law legislation and how this is relevant for surveyors? And to address this question, we can advise that this case was made in reference to a surveyor who was in employment at the time of undertaking a mortgage valuation on behalf of the lender, and he signed off on the mortgage valuation in his own name in lieu of signing this under his company name. There was later found to be a serious defect with the property being purchased, and this led to significant financial losses for the purchaser. And despite the surveyor no longer working for the same practice, the Court of Appeal ruled that he still was personally liable for the defective valuation report that he had prepared, and he was pursued personally for damages and found to be liable for these despite working for his employer at the time the valuation was carried out. And he was deemed to have assumed personal responsibility because he signed the report in his own name, and the protection of working for a limited company did not shield him from being pursued for these damages. And this is a major piece of case law legislation for surveyors to be aware of, as this really highlights the importance for having a run-off cover in place to protect past employees that are no longer working with a firm. And the next question we'll take a look at is, are you aware of any guidance in place that applies to RICS members concerning the use of social media? And the guidance we would need to refer to here to address this question is the use of social media guidance for RICS members. And at the time of recording this video, this is currently under version 2. And this guidance essentially sets out that the rules of conduct still apply to all RICS members, whether communicating via social media or other forms. The RICS rules of conduct must still be maintained, irrespective of any communication forms, even whether this is made by social media, in person, or by other forms of communication. This really does stipulate that the RICS rules of conduct still remain. And another question we may receive on this, again aimed to test our understanding of this area, is how do you ensure that you comply with the guidance the RICS sets on the use of social media? And to address this, we obviously need to have a good understanding of the guide here, but to address this question we could advise that we are always sure to use social media in a responsible and professional manner, in the same way that we communicate, whether that's face-to-face or other written forms of communication. We were always sure to use professional and respectful language when communicating, and understand the responsibility in representing the RICS and promoting public confidence in the profession. We need to be sure to remain fully honest and avoid any disrespectful remarks that could cause offence, as this could potentially undermine the public confidence in the profession and of the RICS.